Imagine this, Los Angeles, 1979. Backstage at the iconic Troubadour, there is a whirl of energy. Guitars shriek during soundcheck, glasses ring out, and rock legends stroll through the corridors as if it were their church. And then out of nowhere, mayhem. A flustered assistant darts into the promoter's office, white-faced and panting. Linda Ronstadt has just walked out of the green room for the second time. Why? There is only one name on the list of performances. Not hers. Not the Eagles. His. One look at that name, and Linda was nowhere to be found. No words, no argument, only a soft, considerate departure that deposited a heavy, uncomfortable silence. For years, nobody really had any idea what occurred that night. Linda never talked about it. No public battles, no tantrums for the tabloids, only nice interviews and the face of a woman serene, proud, and above reproach. But now, that silence has finally been broken. In a rare moment of raw honesty, Linda Ronstadt revealed the 7 names she never forgave, the ones who wounded her pride, challenged her artistry, and exposed the ruthless underbelly of the music industry. And that list was nothing like anyone expected. These weren't petty grudges or fading rivalries. These were tales that defined an entire period, where power, deception, and silent vengeance blended in the scorching universe of rock and roll. And the most astonishing twist? Some of those names used to be closest to her. The first was a drummer who became famous, utilized Linda as a stepping stone, and stepped all over the very ground that she helped him pave. Before Don Henley was rock royalty with the Eagles, he was simply Linda Ronstadt's drummer and backup vocalist, the guy she once helped get his start. In the early 1970s, Linda was the star on the rise, selling out theaters across the country, while Henley rode quietly on her coattails. It was Linda who provided his first genuine break, the assignment that launched everything. But once the Eagles soared, all was transformed. Henley was no longer humble musician she was acquainted with. His ego inflated in perfect harmony with the band's stardom, and gratitude gave way to pride. The band that once shared the bill with Linda now paraded down Sunset Boulevard owning the place. Henley, particularly, behaved like the king of Laurel Canyon, aloof, unapproachable, and disdainful of the woman who put him on the map. The flashpoint arrived in 1975 at the Universal Amphitheater backstage. Henley had a comment that would cut for decades, deriding Linda's artistic vision and snorting that she should stick to singing covers and leave the songwriting to the pros. His words were not only inflammatory, they erased all that she had struggled for with passion, determination, and sheer ability. Linda didn't blow up or shout back. She just turned, canceled his tour credentials on the spot, and headed out. No notice. No second chances. Rumors traveled fast in the industry. Everybody knew Henley's ego had run wild. Friends whispered quietly of cocaine-fueled rants and backstabbing insults behind closed doors. For Linda, the deepest cut wasn't betrayal, it was disrespect. Privately, she would later sum him up in a chilling sentence: a climber who lost his soul chasing fame. But Don Henley wasn't alone in crossing the line. Linda's next confrontation didn't occur quietly in the background. It played out live, before a crowd. A drunken frontman, a hijacked microphone, and a moment of public humiliation, so raw she never forgot it. It was the night Jim Morrison crossed the line. During the Summer of Love in 1968, the summer had passed, but the chaos lingered. The Doors were unstoppable, setting every stage they performed on ablaze, while Linda was still fighting her way to the top in a male-dominated field. That evening, at a discreet after-party close to the whiskey, a go-go, legends and misfits mingled with abandon. No one would have thought what would occur when Jim Morrison laid eyes on Linda. Already a few drinks in, shirt half open, sauntering through the crowd, Morrison yanked Linda onto stage during performance. No notice, no permission. It wasn't quirky or impulsive. It was irresponsible. Then, right in front of all those people, he leaned in and attempted to kiss her. Linda responded as she would to any unseemly stranger. She rebuffed him. Morrison lost his footing, fell into her mic stand, and almost brought the entire setup crashing down with him. Gasps, stares, whispers. The audience had no idea whether to laugh or to hold their breath. The incident was never captured on film, but it existed forever as underground folklore, shared in green rooms and spoken on late-night talk for decades. Morrison never said sorry. Instead, he doubled up. Months on, in a broadcast interview, he ridiculed her, referring to Linda as sweet but spineless, describing her as harmless and forgettable. Linda, predictably, never came back at him in public. But among her close friends, she ripped into Morrison as a brilliant wreck, a man who took both brilliance and chaos with him wherever he went. To Linda, he was more than a rough musician. He was the very essence of toxic masculinity that attempted to reign supreme in all areas of the music industry. While Morrison's actions left psychological wounds, however, the following betrayal was even deeper, and it was perpetrated by a friend. Someone she thought stood with her for the same purpose, until ideals interfaced with ego. That individual was Neil Young. In 1976, a charity concert for farm workers had assembled some of the largest stars in rock, including Linda Ronstadt and Neil Young. On paper, they were friends, bound together by purpose and passion. But behind the scenes, tensions began to simmer. Neil rejected Linda's artistic contributions, dismissed her suggestions for the setlist, blocked her from playing certain songs, and disparaged her sound for being too commercial. And then, to make matters worse, after the performance, he allegedly informed the media that Linda wasn't built for protest, that she wasn't genuine enough for the movement. The message couldn't have been more obvious. She wasn't genuine enough for him. Linda cried and left the venue. It was not only an insult, it was a betrayal from a person she admired. That night was a turning point. From that point on, regardless of how worthy the cause, she never shared a platform with Neil Young again. In private, she referred to him as loud in message, cruel in execution. To her, his activism lacked substance when combined with that degree of arrogance. But if that hurt cut her on a personal level, the second cut destroyed her on a creative one. Because the second betrayal wasn't with the politics at shows or thoughtless comments to the media, it was at the tail end of a recording session, in front of an entire room of musicians, where Linda's pride was torn from her with a single icy sentence. When greatness becomes meanness, Frank Zappa. Their encounter in 1974 held the potential for something legendary. Zappa, the experimental rock-mad genius of the avant-garde, and Ronstadt, fearless, versatile, and vocally unstoppable. On paper, their partnership could have rewritten artistic frontiers. Instead, it disintegrated within hours. It promised well. Linda was really looking forward to recording one of Zappa's compositions. However, as soon as they entered the recording studio, everything went awry. Zappa dismissed her creative suggestions with a sneer, labeling her sound too clean. He chided her for watering down his music, reducing raw art to something that sounded like a car commercial jingle. The situation came to a head during a live rehearsal when Zappa held up his hand, brought the band to an icy stop and sneered, "This is what you get when you give real music to a pop singer." The room stood still. Nobody said a word. Linda did not protest. She just packed her gear and left, humiliated, hurt, and finished. She never came back, and she never collaborated with Zappa again. In public, she remained silent. As ever, her silence was a commentary in itself. Off stage, the people nearest her recall her exact words. Linda referred to Frank Zappa as brilliant but brutal, a mind she immensely admired, but a man she could never again trust. However, confrontations with difficult artists were one thing, betrayal from people she did trust was another. What followed was much more intimate, because the next artist on Linda Ronstadt's roster wasn't a crazy frontman or a maverick genius. It was someone she previously referred to as family, a fellow trailblazer who abandoned her when she needed him most. The Laurel Canyon Backlash, David Crosby. In Laurel Canyon's golden glow, Linda Ronstadt and David Crosby were not just partners, they were soulmates. They toured together, recorded in the same studios, and believed in the same counterculture tenets that characterize an age. Crosby's ethereal harmonies and Linda's style-bending vocals surfed the same radical wave, and for a while, their friendship appeared indomitable. But by 1978, the harmony started to disintegrate. In a recording session for a collaborative project, Linda asked for a basic key shift, one that was more suitable for her range. Crosby declined, dismissing her coldly with, "You should learn to adapt." What would have been a trivial disagreement escalated rapidly. There were raised tempers, rough words, and the fight didn't remain limited to the walls of the studio. Within days, word was passing around the canyon, and before long, the news reached the papers, ranking as one of the most buzzed-about rifts in the close-knit community. And then Crosby went too far. In a Rolling Stone interview, he relegated Linda to manufactured, which was his way of saying that she was image, not art. For Linda, a woman who founded her entire career on honesty, instinct, and untrained talent, it was a betrayal that pierced directly to the center. She didn't shoot back, not in interviews or on stage. She didn't have to. Her silence wasn't vulnerability. It was the burn of a bridge. Behind the scenes, she made important moves. His name was excluded from discussion within her group and inner circle. Studio musicians were told not to speak of him. His songs were removed from her tour itineraries. David Crosby did not exist in Linda's world anymore. To her, Crosby hadn't betrayed a friendship. He had betrayed the very essence of Laurel Canyon, that holy bond of authenticity and artistic freedom they all shared. Privately, she referred to him as a cautionary tale, evidence that even the most intelligent of individuals could be devoured whole by ego, addiction, and celebrity. But if Crosby's infidelity was painful on a personal level, the second one was brutal, slicing, a public assault that hurled punk irreverence into venom. The punk provocation, Elvis Costello's public taunt. It was 1979, and Cleveland crackled with excitement. A giant rock festival had attracted the biggest stars of rock, legends and upstarts, both. Linda Ronstadt, fresh from a string of chart-topper albums, was one of the headliners. She was at the peak of her career, demanding, assertive, and admired. Everyone in the audience was watching her, and that included Elvis Costello, the brash-talking, unflinching punk poet who reveled in knocking down idols. But nobody was prepared for what followed. Surrounded by reporters, Costello scoffed and ridiculed Linda's performance as background music for brunch. It was more than a derogatory remark. It was a public embarrassment. The remark ran like wildfire through the press corps. And when Linda confronted him backstage, pleading for an explanation or perhaps even apology, she was confronted with something icier. Costello, so drunk and obdurate, stared her directly in the face, flung out another vicious insult, and departed with no sign of regret. Linda did not look back. For her, Elvis Costello was not simply an offensive musician. He was a symbol of something further, something she loathed about the evolution of the business. He stood for a new sort of artist, intelligent but unfeeling, endlessly cutting but without sympathy. Not only rebellious, merely cruel for the sake of attention. In his rebelliousness, Linda observed no soul, merely ego. But even that bitterness couldn't hold a candle to the ultimate heartbreak on her list. For the last name wasn't a wild rock star or a boisterous newcomer, but someone whose sound should have meshed perfectly with hers. A voice so compatible it seemed fated. But it was a different story behind the scenes. Their partnership transformed from fantasy to unspoken disaster. Perfection or control, Paul Simon's cold dismissal. It was 1982, and it seemed perfect. Paul Simon, one of the most admired songwriters of his time, teaming up with Linda Ronstadt, the reigning queen of vocal boundary pushing. When it was announced that they would be recording a duet on his new album, fans and critics were overjoyed. On paper, it was magic waiting to happen. In real life, it turned into a slow disintegration. From the very first rehearsal, there was no chemistry. Simon did not like every note, halting takes to rephrase things that did not need to be rephrased. He rewrote parts of the song without informing her, presenting suggestions that came across as veiled criticism. Those who worked with Linda later explained that she explained the experience in one hurting sentence. It felt like being scolded by a school principal. Each note she sang was analyzed, not enjoyed. Each take was followed by fixing, not harmony. Whatever magic they could have had was drowned by mountains of ego and domination. The chemistry never worked. The song was left incomplete, set aside, ignored, never recorded, and never mentioned ever again. But to Linda, the hurt went so much deeper than an unreleased recording. It wasn't about one record. It was about pride, about being respected as an artist. Her voice deserved collaboration. What she got was an autocracy. From that point on, Linda promised herself a silent vow. She would never record with Paul Simon once more. And with that last break, the silence around Linda Ronstadt's deepest betrayals started to disintegrate. 7 musicians, 7 wounds, all covered up under decades of elegance, until now. Because behind every harmony, there is a tale no one listens, until someone finally chooses to share it. So why didn't she speak out all these years? Easy. Linda Ronstadt never was the type to pursue rumors or stoke tabloid wars. For decades, she used her voice. But this news isn't revenge, it's about truth. Linda established her legacy not only on great talent, but on longevity, riding out egos, betrayals, and an industry that consistently showed no compassion. And in shattering her silence now, she's not bringing someone down. She's laying bare the price of staying strong in a world that does not often permit women to be brilliant and unapologetic.